At 3:30 p.m., the school bell rings. And in that exact second, millions of children, they don't even move.
Right. They're just sitting there.
Exactly. They sit at the exact same desks in the exact same classrooms. Maybe they just pull out a different notebook or grab a snack. But the adults supervising them instantly swap out.
Yeah, the whole guard changes.
It does. And behind the scenes, the really stringent, rigorous legal rule book that protects your child is, well, it's quietly replaced by almost nothing.
I mean, it is essentially a jurisdictional scene. It's this massive blind spot where the heavy machinery of the state suddenly vanishes.
Right.
And it leaves the children in this largely unregulated twilight zone. And, like any seam in a garment, it is the exact place where the fabric is most likely to tear under pressure.
Wow. Yeah. Welcome to the deep dive. If you've ever dropped a kid off at a holiday camp or a 4:00 p.m. arts program or even morning before school care, you probably assume a lot of things.
We all do. We assume the safety nets are identical.
Right. You assume the background checks on that teenager handing out juice boxes you assume they're identical to the checks on the child's math teacher. But today's deep dive proves why that assumption is just fundamentally broken.
Completely broken.
We have this really groundbreaking report on the table today. It's dated April 17th, 2026, and it comes from CIIVISE. That is the Independent Commission on Incest and Sexual Violence Against Children over in France.
Yeah.
And our mission today is to really unpack their urgent blueprint for completely overhauling the French terms are périscolaire and extrascolaire sectors, basically the after-school and extracurricular spaces.
What's fascinating here is that this document, it operates on two distinct levels.
How do you mean?
Well, on one hand, it exposes a massive structural failure with just chilling clarity. But on the other, it provides this highly technical, granular roadmap for rebuilding the system from the ground up.
Right.
It really forces us to examine how bureaucratic fragmentation actively creates these environments where, unfortunately, predators can operate totally undetected.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the sheer scale of what we're talking about today is staggering. We are talking about millions of kids.
Millions. Every single day.
Yeah. And we're talking about how seemingly mundane things like training certificates, municipal databases, local government reporting protocols, they are actually the absolute front line of child safety.
It's literally life and death hidden in paperwork.
Exactly, hidden in paperwork. But before we get into the actual solutions this commission is proposing, I think we have to map out the current disaster. We need to really look at this blind spot.
We have to diagnose the problem first, yeah.
Right. Why is the after-school sector so uniquely vulnerable to abuse compared to the hours between, say, 8:00 a.m. and 3:30 p.m.?
So the CIIVISE report reveals a landscape that is defined by what it calls institutional segmentation.
Institutional segmentation.
Yes.
Yeah.
Currently, there is no precise, unified national framework for the extracurricular sector.
Wait, none at all?
Not a unified one, no. Whether you are looking at how workers are trained or how they are recruited or how the institutions are monitored or even how incidents are reported, the rules are just deeply, deeply fragmented.
Wow.
The relationship between the formal school institution, so the Ministry of National Education, and the various municipalities and private associations running the after-school programs, it's described in the text as distended. It completely lacks coherence.
I kept thinking of it when I was reading the source, like a relay race where the runners are completely blindfolded.
That's a really good analogy, actually.
Right, because the school runner is sprinting down the track.
Yeah.
They are heavily monitored by the state. They have years of specialized training. They have an entire administrative hierarchy tracking their performance, and they run in this straight, well-lit line.
Yeah, very controlled.
Very controlled. But then they hand the baton, which is the child, to the after-school program. And the new runner has zero communication with the first runner.
None. They don't share a professional language at all.
Yeah. Right. There's no unified rule book for their leg of the race. If they share responsibility for the exact same kids, sometimes literally in the exact same physical building, it is baffling to me that their professional cultures are so completely disconnected.
Well, and that disconnection, it's important to note, it's not born of malicious intent.
Right. Nobody designed it to be bad.
Exactly. It's the byproduct of decades of decentralized administrative growth. The school is this monolithic state entity. But the after-school space, it's a patchwork of thousands of local municipalities, private associations, nonprofit.
And they're all operating with different budgets, right? And different priorities.
Completely different budgets. But this fragmentation, the report explicitly identifies it as a proven negative factor. It's a dynamic that actively harms children, particularly when we're talking about situations of sexual violence.
Because predators, they look for the seams.
Right.
They don't want to operate under the harsh glare of the national education system.
No, they want the fragmented shadows.
Right. They engineer situations within those shadows.
Yeah, and when one team of adults succeeds another without any real continuity, when there's no overarching supervision tracking a child's behavior or an adult's behavior, across that transition point, vulnerabilities just emerge so rapidly.
And compounding this whole structural gap is the reality of the workforce itself, the actual people on the ground running these programs.
The report paints a really grim picture of the daily reality for these workers, actually.
It really does. It highlights that the current workforce, despite having, immense goodwill and dedication, they are suffering under intense pressure.
Yeah, severe undertraining.
Undertraining, a complete lack of professional recognition, incredibly low pay, and highly precarious short-term contracts. The turnover rate is just through the roof.
Which creates a vicious cycle.
Yeah.
Because when turnover is that high, institutions are constantly scrambling to fill spots.
Just to keep the doors open.
Exactly.
Oh.
A small-town mayor or a community center director might be desperate for warm bodies just to meet the legally mandated adult-to-child ratio before they open on Monday morning.
And when you're desperate, you aren't checking as closely.
Right. When the system operates in a state of perpetual emergency staffing, the rigor of recruitment naturally plummets. The report essentially argues that we have created a high-turnover, low-status environment for the very people tasked with protecting our most vulnerable population.
During their most unstructured, chaotic hours, no less.
Exactly.
It's the ultimate paradox. We hand over our most precious demographic to a workforce that society essentially treats them as disposable.
Yes, that's exactly it.
So how do we close this gap? The report starts with the people on the ground. The first massive shift CIIVISE is demanding is the absolute end of treating after-school care as just babysitting. They want to redefine the profession entirely.
Yeah, their primary recommendation focuses on really reinforcing the qualification, the recognition, and the reliability of these workers. The report states unequivocally that we must break with this persistent cultural perception that animation in the extracurricular sector is an unqualified job.
Because as a society, we definitely have a bad habit of minimizing care work.
Oh, absolutely.
We picture a teenager, handing out art supplies, breaking up a minor squabble over a soccer ball, and we just think, well, anyone with a pulse and a bit of patience can do that.
Which is so far from the truth.
In France, there's this cultural institution called the BFA. It's the Certificate for Youth Workers, and historically, it's been viewed almost like a rite of passage.
Yeah, a fun summer gig for an 18-year-old before they go off to university.
Right. But CIIVISE is demanding mandatory, specific, highly rigorous training for all contract and temporary workers. They want to take that BFA concept and forge it into a homogeneous, serious national standard. So what does this all mean for the person actually applying for the job today?
Well, it means they will be treated and evaluated as highly skilled professionals. Professionals who are capable of exercising proper authority and managing complex psychological crises.
Which is a huge step up from handing out juice boxes.
A massive step up. To achieve this, the report outlines 5 complementary pillars of training, and these must be mastered by every single worker, regardless of whether they are full-time or just on a 2-month summer contract.
Okay, let's break those 5 pillars down, because this isn't just about learning how to organize a safe field trip.
No, not at all. So the first pillar is a deep, comprehensive knowledge of child development and a child's specific needs at different stages.
Like understanding milestones.
Exactly. A worker needs to understand that a 6-year-old's emotional regulation looks vastly different from a 12-year-old's. They need to understand neurodevelopmental baselines so they can actually spot when a child is deviating from them.
Which flows perfectly into the second pillar, right? The didactic and pedagogical skills.
Yes. They need to be able to align what they are doing in the afternoon with the formal schooling the child receives during the day.
Meaning the end of the blindfolded relay race.
Exactly. The after-school worker needs to understand the pedagogical goals of the school so they can create a coherent environment. For instance, if a child is struggling with reading anxiety during the day, the after-school worker should have the training to recognize that anxiety. They should adapt their recreational activities accordingly, rather than, say, punishing the child for acting out during a reading-heavy board game.
That makes so much sense. But that level of integration requires actual professional communication between the teacher and the animator.
It completely demands it. Now, the third pillar covers general child protection.
Okay, what does that entail?
Workers must know the rights of the child, the fundamental legal texts, and the specific architecture of the state's child protection services.
Wow, so actual legal frameworks.
Yes. They need to know the difference between calling the police, calling social services, and calling a medical professional, and under what circumstances each is required.
It's essentially turning them into localized legal advocates.
That's a good way to put it. Then the fourth pillar is professional ethics. So the foundational rules of professional conduct.
Like establishing boundaries.
Exactly. Establishing firm boundaries, understanding the power dynamics between an adult and a child, and maintaining appropriate professional distance while still, providing emotional warmth and support.
Which is a tough balance to strike. And then the fifth pillar, because this is the one that really anchors the Commission's entire mandate, isn't it?
It is. The fifth pillar is a masterful command of the procedures for identifying signals of distress or trauma.
Right.
And critically, knowing how to receive a child's disclosure of violence and knowing exactly how to report it.
The psychological weight of that fifth pillar is just immense. I mean, think about the scenario. You are a 20-year-old after-school worker. You are cleaning up paintbrushes,
Yeah.
and a quiet 9-year-old walks up to you and finally decides to break their silence about abuse happening at home, or even worse, abuse happening within the program itself.
It's terrifying.
That is a razor's edge moment. If you react with a gasp of horror, you might terrify the child into thinking they've done something wrong. Or if you ask a leading question, like, did so-and-so touch you? You might inadvertently contaminate their testimony for future police investigations.
Which happens all the time, unfortunately.
And if you dismiss it out of your own discomfort and say, are you sure you're not just making up a story? You force that child right back into the dark. And they may never speak up again.
The training CIIVISE is demanding ensures that the worker in that scenario stays calm, uses open-ended language, validates the child's courage, and knows the exact protocol to trigger the reporting circuit.
Without trying to be a detective.
Exactly, without attempting to investigate the claim themselves. But what's fascinating here is, if we connect this to the bigger picture, you simply cannot demand this level of high-stakes, crisis management competence from a workforce that you are paying minimum wage on a 3-month temporary contract.
No, you can't ask someone to be a trauma specialist on a gig economy budget. It's absurd.
Which is why the report directly links this necessary training to a demand to end what it calls structural precariousness.
Okay, so how do they fix that?
The Commission proposes a massive national plan to absorb this precariousness. Effectively, they want to make this robust training the absolute prerequisite, the sine qua non for all future hires.
So you force the issue.
Right. By requiring the training, you force the system to invest in the workers, which naturally elevates the role from a casual gig to a vital, recognized, and stable profession.
Okay, let's play this out. Let's say the government funds this. We elevate the profession. We train everyone on the 5 pillars. The workers are respected and well compensated.
That's the dream.
Right. But training is just the software running in the worker's mind. And software only works if the hardware of the institution is secure. So how do we build a firewall?
The recruitment process.
Yeah. How do we ensure that bad actors, predators who might be perfectly willing, maybe even eager, to sit through a rigorous training seminar just to gain access to children, don't enter the system in the first place?
So this brings us to the crucial infrastructure of recruitment and background checks. And the report notes a really stark divide here.
Between who?
Between permanent civil servant staff within the national education system and the temporary workers. For the permanent staff, there's a personalized, continuous dossier tracking their entire career.
Okay.
But for temporary or contract workers in the extracurricular sector, the recruitment process is incredibly fragile.
Especially in rural areas, right. The report specifically points out that small municipalities struggle under the weight of this responsibility.
Oh, absolutely. A small-town mayor doesn't have a massive human resources department.
Right. They might be reviewing an application from someone who just moved to town, and they just have to take the applicant's resume at face value.
To eliminate that vulnerability, the report demands that systematic background checks, what the French administrative system calls honorability checks, must be strictly mandatory prior to hiring.
And then repeated, right.
Yes, repeated every 3 to 5 years for all staff.
But what exactly are they checking in these databases? Because, background check is a pretty vague term.
It is. But in this case, it requires checking very specific registries. First, Recruiters must systematically obtain an attestation based on the B2 file.
The B2 file. What's that?
In France, the criminal record is divided into bulletins. Bulletin 3 is what you can request for yourself. But Bulletin 2 contains a much wider array of convictions, including the ones that legally incapacitate a person from working with minors. The authorities must check the B2.
But a standard criminal record only shows convictions. What about people who are flagged as severe risks but maybe avoided a long prison sentence or, they're currently under strict judicial monitoring?
That is exactly where the specialized registries come in. The authorities must have facilitated rapid access to check the CIIVISE.
FJJ.
Yes, that is the National Registry for Perpetrators of Sexual and Violent Offenses. It tracks individuals who are convicted, but also those indicted or even acquitted under certain psychiatric grounds, which mandates them to justify their address regularly.
Oh, wow. So it's much broader than just a conviction record.
Much broader. And they also must check the FIJITE, which tracks terrorist offenses and radicalization.
I mean, it seems so obvious that a school or camp should check the sex offender registry. Why is this framed as a new demand in the report?
Because currently the data is heavily siloed.
Ah, bureaucracy.
Exactly. A local mayor trying to hire a summer camp counselor might face an administrative labyrinth to get cross-departmental clearance from these national registries. The ultimate goal CIIVISE proposes is the creation of a single interministerial file.
A unified database.
Yes, a database that gathers all pertinent information regarding a person's capacity to work with children across all sectors: schools, sports clubs, cultural centers, after-school programs, everything.
Breaking down the silos. So if you are banned from teaching a morning math class, that interministerial file ensures you are instantly flagged if you try to coach the afternoon soccer team.
Precisely. But the Commission also recognizes that databases only catch people who have already interacted with the justice system.
Right. What about the people who haven't been caught yet?
Exactly. What about behavioral red flags that never resulted in a police report? To address this, the report proposes a fascinating new tool. It's called the Personal Path Certificate, or Attestation Personnelle de Parcours.
I found this concept incredibly compelling. It essentially functions as a professional passport for youth workers, right?
Yeah, that's exactly how it works. Applicants would have to provide a documented, continuously verified history of their past service, and it has to be signed off by previous employers.
It forces a paper trail of accountability, because the system currently suffers from a devastating phenomenon. A worker behaves inappropriately in one town. Maybe not enough to trigger a police investigation, but enough that the director quietly fires them to avoid a scandal.
The local arrangement.
Right, and then that worker just drives 20 miles to the next town, applies for a new job, and because the two towns don't communicate, they are hired immediately.
Exactly. The Personal Path Certificate disrupts that municipal hopping. The new employer would demand the certificate, see the gap in verified service, or contact the previous signatory.
So we've fortified the entry points. But the report doesn't stop at recruitment. It tackles the most volatile scenario. What happens when someone is already inside the firewall, working with kids every day, and a suspicion arises?
Yeah.
Like a child makes a disclosure or another worker notices grooming behavior? How does the system actually isolate the threat?
This leads to one of the most structurally aggressive changes proposed in the text. It's about extending the administrative suspension period.
Okay, tell me about this.
Currently, the legal maximum for a precautionary suspension of a public worker suspected of violence is 4 months. CIIVISE proposes doubling that to 8 months.
Okay, here's where I have to pause and look at the logistics of this. Suspending someone for 8 months based on a suspicion. I mean, doesn't that fundamentally clash with the presumption of innocence?
It's a very valid question.
If a worker is falsely accused by an angry parent or some misunderstanding spirals totally out of control, you are basically destroying your livelihood for nearly a year before a judge has even looked at the case. Why 8 months specifically? Why not just suspend them indefinitely until the trial is over, or keep it at 4 months to protect the worker's rights?
It is a vital tension to explore. And to understand the 8-month rule, we really have to unpack the massive chronological gap between administrative reality and judicial reality.
Okay, break that down for me.
When an alert is raised, the administration suspends the worker for 4 months while the police and the justice system begin their investigation.
Right.
But in the context of the judicial system, especially in cases involving minors, which require specialized forensic interviews, psychological evaluations, meticulous evidence gathering, 4 months is the blink of an eye.
Oh, I see.
The police are often just getting started by the time that 4-month administrative clock runs out.
So the administrative clock hits 0, but the police are still investigating. What does the employer do? They legally have to reinstate the person, right?
Yes, they are legally obligated to bring the person back onto the payroll.
Mm.
But they obviously cannot put that individual back in the same classroom with the child who made the accusation.
Obviously not.
So institutions engage in what the report chillingly labels professional displacements of convenience.
Displacements of convenience. They just shuffle the deck.
They quietly move the suspected individual to a different facility. Maybe they transfer them from the elementary school recreation center to the municipal library, or they give them an administrative desk job at a summer camp in the next district over.
Which is horrifying because the investigation hasn't cleared them. It is still ongoing. By moving them to a new facility, you are potentially dragging a hidden risk right into the laps of a completely new group of children who have absolutely no idea this person is under investigation.
It disorganizes the institution, and it exponentially increases the risk to the public. So, extending the suspension to 8 months is an attempt to align the administrative timeline more closely with the sluggish judicial timeline.
Buying time.
Exactly. It gives the police a realistic window to determine if criminal charges are warranted while keeping the suspected individual entirely out of the environment.
And what about the workers' rights during those 8 months? Because that's still a long time to be suspended.
The report is very clear that this is a precautionary measure, not a disciplinary sanction. The suspension is fully paid.
Okay, that's a big distinction.
More importantly, the report mandates that during these 8 months, the suspended staff must receive specialized support, psychological follow-up, and clear communication from their authorities. It is not an abandonment. It is a legally enforced, supported pause to allow the justice system to function without using other children as collateral damage in the interim.
And the report really hammers home that these stringent rules, so the unified databases, the personal path certificates, the 8-month suspensions, they cannot just apply to government civil servants.
No, not at all.
They have to apply equally to private partner associations. Very often, a town doesn't want to run the after-school program themselves, so they delegate it to a local nonprofit or a sports association. CIIVISE says those associations must face the exact same rigorous qualification and honorability requirements to get their operating licenses approved. No loopholes.
Because a predator does not care if their paycheck is signed by the mayor's office or by the treasurer of the local gymnastics nonprofit. The access to the child is identical. Therefore, the standards must be identical.
So we've trained the staff, we've locked down recruitment, we've closed the administrative loopholes, we've built this massive multi-layered firewall. But let's face the darkest reality here. Firewalls are breached.
They are.
What happens when violence still occurs inside the program, or when a child shows those subtle signs of distress? We need to look at how institutions react, or, tragically, how they engineer their own failure to react.
This brings us to a section of the report that serves as a direct, almost aggressive confrontation with institutional psychology. The text explicitly targets the deeply ingrained culture of the local arrangement and the overwhelming bureaucratic desire to not make waves.
Don't make waves. It is the universal instinct of any bureaucracy. If you acknowledge a problem, you have to deal with the problem. And dealing with the problem requires paperwork, budget allocations, and bad press.
Right.
It's like a ship captain who refuses to acknowledge a massive gushing leak in the hull because sounding the alarm might cause a panic on the promenade deck. So the captain just orders the band to play louder while the ship quietly sinks.
That's exactly how it functions.
And the report notes something happening in these institutions that genuinely shocked me: the weaponization of the duty of reserve.
The devoir de reserve. In the French civil service, this is a foundational principle. It is the obligation for public employees to act with restraint, to maintain political neutrality, and to not publicly disparage the government or their specific institution. It exists to maintain public trust in the state.
But the report reveals that this concept is being warped to silence whistleblowers. I mean, imagine a 20-year-old camp counselor notices the camp director acting inappropriately with a child.
Okay.
The counselor goes to an administrator, and the administrator says, "You cannot report this. It will ruin the camp's reputation, and you are bound by your duty of reserve to the institution to keep this internal." That is a horrifying misinterpretation of the law.
It is institutional gaslighting. The duty of reserve does not and legally cannot apply to the reporting of a crime.
But it works?
It does. When an older, experienced director cites a formal legal principle to a young, precarious worker, it creates an impenetrable wall of silence. And the report also tackles another fundamental legal concept that gets weaponized by administrators, the presumption of innocence.
Wait, how does an administrator weaponize the presumption of innocence?
Well, the presumption of innocence is a sacred foundation of the rule of law, right? It protects individual liberties against the power of the state. However, the report stresses that the presumption of innocence is a doctrine that must be wielded by the judicial authority, by judges and juries. It must not be used as an administrative excuse by center directors to block reports.
So a center director plays judge. A parent comes in and says, my child said your gym teacher touched them. And the director says, well, the gym teacher's a great guy. He's worked here for 20 years. He is presumed innocent until proven guilty, so I am not going to forward your complaint to the police. We will handle it internally.
Precisely. The director uses a legal concept to justify their own inaction. The report makes a declarative statement backed by extensive commission data here. Cases of fallacious, entirely fabricated allegations are statistically incredibly rare.
Really rare.
Yes. Therefore, an alert from a family or a staff member must be taken seriously immediately. Reporting a staff member suspected of violence is not an option. It is an absolute obligation. And to enforce this, CIIVISE proposes the creation of a circuit unique de signalement, a single, unified reporting circuit.
The single circuit solves a massive logistical nightmare. Because right now, if that 20-year-old worker suspects something, they are paralyzed by options. Do they call the local police precinct? Do they tell their shift manager? Do they call the National Child Abuse Hotline? Do they try to find the school principal?
And in that hesitation, in that confusion over jurisdiction, crucial time is lost.
Exactly.
The single circuit, which would be governed by a national vademecum, so a comprehensive handbook of protection and reporting, it eliminates the hesitation. It becomes the common reference point for every single person operating in the sector. You suspect abuse, you follow the single circuit, no debates, no local arrangements, no internal investigations, you just trigger the protocol.
And when that protocol is triggered and a child's testimony actually needs to be taken by the authorities, the infrastructure has to be there to handle it. This is where CIIVISE makes a demand for a massive physical infrastructure investment. They are calling for the rapid expansion of UAPs.
The Unité d'accueil pédiatrique enfants en danger. These are specialized pediatric reception units for children in danger. They are typically located within hospital centers and are designed specifically to safely and expertly collect a child's testimony, almost always under judicial requisition.
To really understand why this is so important, contrast it with the alternative. A child has just disclosed severe trauma. Without a UAP, that child might be taken down to a standard police precinct.
Yeah, which is terrifying for an adult, let alone a child.
Right. They are sitting in a sterile, intimidating interrogation room. A police officer in full uniform, who might be used to interrogating burglary suspects, is asking them rapid-fire, leading questions. The child is terrified, they shut down, or worse, they change their story to give the scary officer the answer they think the officer wants to hear.
Which compromises the entire judicial process. The UAP changes the environment entirely. The child's in a warm pediatric setting. The interview is conducted by specialized professionals, often a gendarme or police officer specifically trained in forensic child interviewing, paired with a pediatric psychologist.
That makes such a difference.
Huge. They use anatomical dolls, open-ended prompts, and specialized recording equipment to preserve the raw, unprompted testimony for the judge, so the child doesn't have to repeat their trauma multiple times.
It's all about securing the best possible evidence while minimizing the trauma of the investigation itself.
Exactly. But the report notes a glaring problem. There simply aren't enough of them.
Not enough units.
No. The geographical coverage is highly uneven. If you live in a major city, you might have access to one. But if you live in a rural department, the nearest UAP might be a 3-hour drive away. CIIVISE is demanding that the number of UAPs across the entire national territory be at least doubled within the next 5 years, prioritizing those underserved departments.
It proves that a cultural shift isn't enough. You can train everyone to listen, but you need the physical infrastructure, the actual good mortar units, to hear a child's voice safely.
And if we look at this entire section, what CIIVISE is demanding is a complete paradigm shift in institutional loyalty. Historically, institutions are wired for self-preservation. This report draws a line in the sand and declares that institutional loyalty must be entirely replaced by absolute loyalty to the supreme interest of the child. It is a demand for radical transparency over image management.
Radical transparency over image management. I think that should be plastered on the wall of every administrative office in the country.
I agree.
But to enforce this cultural shift on a local level, the government needs a bird's eye view. I mean, how do you manage a system if you can't even measure it? We need to look at data, oversight, and a national strategy.
And here we uncover another alarming blind spot. The report highlights that currently, local control of after-school activities is entirely disparate.
How disparate are we talking?
Often, beyond a formal initial declaration to the local authority that a recreation center exists, there is zero ongoing control or inspection.
It's like building a new highway, putting up a speed limit sign on day one, and then never, ever sending a police car to check if anyone is actually obeying the limit. You just hope for the best.
That is exactly what it's like. CIIVISE proposes an impartial, mandatory national protocol for declaring and controlling these activities. They suggest this continuous oversight should happen at the departmental level, since the departments in France are already the administrative bodies responsible for broader child protection services.
That makes sense.
But oversight requires data, and right now the extracurricular sector operates in a statistical black hole.
This part is genuinely baffling to me. I mean, we meticulously track standardized test scores across thousands of school districts. We know exactly how many math books a school buys. We track daily attendance down to the decimal point. The national education system publishes massive volumes of data on school climate and serious incidents.
They do.
But severe incidents happening in the cafeteria at 4:30 p.m. fall into a statistical void. How is that even possible?
It is a byproduct of the decentralization we discussed earlier. Because the extracurricular sector is managed by thousands of individual municipalities and private associations, each with their own reporting methods, there's no aggregated national data collection.
And why is that lack of aggregated data so dangerous? I mean, apart from just being bad administration.
Because without statistics, you are navigating in the dark. Policymakers have no idea if their interventions are working. They cannot adjust public policy to address emerging trends. And most terrifyingly, systemic abusers can hide in the statistical noise.
Oh, right.
If one town has a spike in behavioral incidents or staff suspensions, but that data never goes to a central national database, nobody connects the dots. The wider pattern is totally invisible.
So a predator can bounce around a region, creating tiny ripples in 5 different towns, but because there's no national seismograph, nobody realizes there's an earthquake happening.
Exactly the problem.
Yeah.
The report calls for an interministerial task force to build a centralized statistical database.
Yeah.
In this context, data collection is not bureaucratic red tape. It is a literal safety net.
It connects the dots.
It allows the state to see the patterns of abuse, to map where the vulnerabilities are, and to dismantle them proactively.
So we have the state building the databases. We have the institutions radically shifting their culture to prioritize transparency. We have the workers getting rigorous, highly specialized training. The state and the professionals are finally aligned.
But there's one missing piece.
Right. The most invested party in all of this, the absolute most vital layer of defense, is often left completely out in the cold. I'm talking about the families.
Yes. The Commission points out a glaring asymmetry of power here. Families currently lack basic, standardized information on their rights, on how child protection mechanisms actually work, and crucially, on exactly what steps to take if they suspect abuse within an after-school program.
I cannot imagine the panic of suspecting your child is being harmed and then hitting a wall of institutional silence or bureaucratic confusion when you try to report it.
The feeling of powerlessness must be suffocating.
Truly. So the solution CIIVISE proposes is twofold. First, a national vademecum, a handbook specifically designed for families, translating the complex legal realities into clear, accessible language. And second, a local guide handed out at the exact moment of enrollment, providing the exact local contacts, phone numbers, and protocols.
But providing a handbook is meaningless if the institution refuses to engage with the parent holding the handbook. This is why the report demands the creation of a regulatory obligation to listen.
Let's examine that obligation to listen. Because from the institution's perspective, aren't parents often highly emotional? A kid comes home with a bruised knee from dodgeball, or a kid complains that a counselor yelled at them, and a hyper-anxious parent storms into the director's office demanding someone be fired.
That definitely happens.
So how does a sender director filter out standard parental anxiety from a legitimate alert without just shutting the parent down entirely?
It requires a delicate balance, and that is exactly why the obligation to listen is so critical. Historically, Institutions have held all the cards. When an incident occurs or a parent raises an alarm, the instinct of the administration is often to close ranks.
Defensive mode.
Right. They patronize the parents. They say, we are handling it internally, or we can't tell you anything for the sake of the ongoing investigation. The parents are treated as nuisances, as emotional variables that need to be managed and minimized, rather than as the primary protectors of the child.
And CIIVISE is saying, no, the families are essential partners. You don't manage them, you collaborate with them.
The report demands a democratization of the investigative process. It states that families must receive regular updates on the calendar, the administrative steps being taken, and the progress of reporting procedures and staff suspensions.
Even during a police investigation.
Well, it acknowledges that the necessary secrecy of police investigations must be respected. You cannot share evidentiary details that might compromise a trial. But that necessary secrecy cannot be used as a blanket excuse for total silence. The administration must maintain transparent communication about the process itself.
Because keeping a family in the dark while their child is in crisis is a secondary trauma inflicted by the state. You are essentially victimizing the family twice.
And to mitigate that secondary trauma, the report also mandates that families confronted with these critical situations must have immediate access to a specialized support cell.
What does that look like in practice?
It means that the moment a serious alert is raised, the family is connected with dedicated professionals. Psychologists, legal advisors, social workers.
So they aren't just left floating.
Exactly. They need immediate guidance on how to support their traumatized child at home. They need legal counsel to understand their rights as civil parties in a potential criminal case. They cannot be left alone to navigate the terrifying labyrinth of the judicial and administrative systems.
Looking at this entire document, the scope of what CIIVISE is proposing is just breathtaking. This isn't a list of minor tweaks to a scheduling app. It is a demand for a complete cultural and structural revolution.
There really is.
It is taking a sector that has been historically fragmented, precarious, and governed by a terrifying don't make waves mentality, and dragging it out into the harsh light of accountability. It demands a highly trained, unified, data-driven profession where every single bureaucratic decision, from who gets hired to how a database is coded, is centered entirely on the supreme interest of the child.
It is a blueprint for making the invisible systems visible and making them accountable. It demands that the hours after the school bell rings are guarded with the exact same rigor, the exact same financial investment, and the exact same professional respect as the hours before it.
If you've ever dropped a kid off at a community center, a holiday camp, or an after-school classroom, I really hope this deep dive has changed the way you look at those everyday spaces. There is a massive invisible machinery operating around the children in your lives.
Yeah, we often don't even see it.
And it's documents like this CIIVISE report that serve as the quiet engines of social progress, fighting to make sure that machinery is actually built to protect them rather than just process them.
I think there is one final thought we should leave the listener with today. We spent this entire time looking at how this report builds defensive systems. Databases, background checks, suspension rules, these are all designed to catch and remove predators.
Right.
But consider the proactive, offensive impact of this overhaul. If we successfully implement this massive society-wide training, if we educate hundreds of thousands of after-school workers deeply on child development, on recognizing distress, on honoring a child's voice and physical boundaries.
It changes the air the kids breathe every single afternoon.
Exactly. How might that fundamentally change the way the next generation of children understands their own boundaries and autonomy?
Yeah.
If every adult in their recreational life, every soccer coach, every art teacher, every camp counselor, models perfect respect for their physical and emotional integrity and listens to them without dismissal, how much stronger will those children be before they ever even face a threat?
That is a profound thought. We started by talking about blindfolded relay races and jurisdictional seams. What CIIVISE is doing here isn't just trying to weave a tighter safety net. They are trying to change the entire culture of how adults interact with children in the public square.
Exactly.
And that is an effort worth paying very close attention to. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the systems operating in the background around you, and we'll see you next time.